I work with Steph at the Future Cities Catapult, and a lot of people ask us, what does the Future Cities Catapult do? I will tell you what the Future Cities Catapult do. We advance urban innovation to grow UK companies to make cities better. What does that actually mean? In essence, what we do is we look at where technology and innovation is happening, and we look at where practice is, and we try and bridge that gap. And we're working on a project at the minute which is about looking specifically at the role of planning. Town planning, and what the benefits that technology can bring to it. Now, we've got a very specific approach. Does anyone know who this is? This is Cedric Price, famous architect in the 60s and 70s. He famously said, technology is the answer, but what is the question? And this is what our approach to technology is. We think technology is a good thing, but let's not jump in head first into this world and think it's going to solve our problems. What I'd like to kick off the talk today is with a few kind of big trends, the things which are happening. You might think, whilst I'm talking about this is completely irrelevant to planning. And it might be, we don't know, but this is what's happening in the world today. 1965, Gordon Moore came up with Moore's Law. Has anyone heard of Moore's Law? Yeah. So Moore's Law basically said that stated that the number of transistors in an integrated circuit was doubling exponentially every year. And this was an observation in the 60s, and it carried on all the way to today. And if we exponentially carry this trend on, by 2025 we'll have processors which are as smart as mice. You might think not very smart, but actually very, very powerful. And what this means is that nowadays we have processors that are incredibly powerful and incredibly fast. They're also incredibly cheap and incredibly small. A lot of us will have in our phones these. In our pockets, mobile phones, which have got lots and lots and lots of chips and sensors in it. An average phone has about 10 sensors, collecting everything from your location, from your movement, from the light, etc. You can go on. And not only that, we also even have jewelry nowadays that we put chips in, and which is collecting data about everywhere we go and everything we do. And what that means is that nowadays we have more data than we've ever had before. We send about 2.9 million emails every second around the world. We have about 20 hours of YouTube video uploaded per minute every single day. 50 million tweets per day. So there's a lot of data. We've got all this technology, and we've got all this data that we're producing. And what all that means is that together with all this stuff, we've got about 40 billion connected devices. So think about this, all these tiny processors in all these gadgets producing all this data and all of it connected. So it's no wonder that nowadays we're getting to the stage where computers are getting incredibly smart. About this time last year, a British company, DeepMind, which was bought over by Google, beat the world champion in the game of Go. Now this is particularly significant because unlike chess, where a computer can actually work out all the possibilities and then beat the human, which is pretty simple to do, relatively speaking. In Go, there is more alternatives in Go than there are atoms in the universe. It's technically impossible to actually predict every single alternative in the game of Go. But last year, we've managed to get computers that did that. And these smart computers nowadays means that we can fly planes, we can recognize faces. Computers even provide legal advice and mark essays. We've heard about driverless cars still emerging, and even diagnosing cancer. Computers in some forms of cancer are actually better than clinical pathologists at diagnosing cancer. So there's some really big innovations which are happening here. And this is what's happening kind of in the world because of it. Uber, the world's largest taxi company, owns no vehicle. Facebook creates no content. Alibaba, the most valuable retailer in the world, has no inventory. And Airbnb, the world's largest accommodation, has no real estate. So this is changing how we use cities. Things like Citymapper, a lot of us use it now on a daily basis. Workspace, for example, now you can actually, it's become a service rather than having an office. And there's a number of trends which are having a massive impact in the way that we live in cities. But how do we plan cities? The way we plan cities is still very much set in the 20th century. We know about the housing crisis. We know about the quality of places, the issues with tall buildings that a lot of people dislike. And we know about how citizens are pretty angry about the way we do things. So if you actually have a look at kind of the digitalization of lots of different sectors, this is a study that McKinsey did on the digitization of lots of different trends. Construction industry is down here, within which planning is. Second to last only for agriculture and hunting. We at the Digital Strategies, we at the Future Cities Catapult are still working out how we can actually digitize agriculture and hunting, but for now we're going to stick to planning. But our approach isn't that planning is broken. A lot of people say planning is broken. Government has for the last few years tried to change the planning system and try and kind of change permitted development, etc. But we actually think it just needs upgrading. It needs to start making use of this technology. And what we tried to do when we started this project, we tried to kind of summarize the planning system in a single slide. Is anyone here a planner? Yeah, a few planners? Okay, good, a few planners. I'm not going to go into this in too much detail, but I think we managed to relatively well summarize the whole planning system in a single image. And what we did was we did some research. We did some user research where we actually shadowed planners and developers and architects to find out where were the main opportunities for digitizing the planning system and for really having a big impact. And we identified 4 key areas. Firstly, data, how we collect data in planning. Now this, yeah, and this, and this, and this, and this are a bunch of PDF documents which a local authority has paid about, on average, £100,000 per document to actually create an evidence base for their local plan. That's a lot of money spent on collecting a lot of data. This data lives somewhere in the servers of the local council, and they're completely inaccessible. These are PDFs which are non-machine readable. They're poorly named. If you look at the names, it's very hard to figure out what is what. And despite all this money that's being spent to do this, it's a bit useless now. We often talk about the PDFs as where data goes to die. We're trying to fix that, and we will. The other thing that we're finding out is actually because all this data is completely inaccessible and people don't seem to be that worried about where the data is coming from or where it lives, you have planning consultancies now offering things like black box reports, where actually we won't tell you what the data is, we'll tell you what the answer is, and it's much cheaper. And meanwhile, the same consultancy will then go to a developer and to everyone else and resell the same data over and over again. And we've been looking at obviously the evidence base on local plans is one aspect, but also the amount of data that goes through the planning application every day through 7,000 planning applications a year that some of the local authorities in London have to look at. There's a lot of data that goes through the planning authorities, and it's all not very well collected. We think there's a better way. We think we can consolidate, open, and diversify planning data. Consolidate, i.e. bring it all together. So the data that goes through planning applications can be seen together with the data that is collected as part of the evidence base, and also the monitoring aspect of planning. And we can maybe start looking at new data sources. We mentioned all the data that we're producing. None of that data on that previous slide about all the data that we have in the world is actually being used for planning. Social media, whether it's mobile phones, etc. And then the second big issue is flexibility. It takes about 4 to 5 years to produce a plan. By the time these plans are done, they're out of date. Everyone knows this. We're looking at ways, is there smarter ways of doing this? Can we actually be a bit more responsive to both cultural, economic, and political cycles? So when you come up with your affordable housing policies during a recession, you can actually maybe tweak them when the market's going well and actually respond to the market a little bit more. We think there is. We think that we can actually start breaking up this idea of the local plan into separate policies and make the whole thing a bit more agile and a little bit more iterative. The third area is the planning application process. Has anyone here ever applied for planning application? Yeah? Yeah, a few of you. It's known to be very opaque and confusing, which is why it really relies on a bunch of consultants who make a lot of money and experts to do this. It's not really the friendliest service. It's not really the friendliest experience. Local policy is really hard to interpret. Every single local area has got different policies. So as soon as you figure out what the process is, there's then all the policy that you have to figure out. We still rely, we still rely on filling this stuff. Once this application sheet here is filled in, all written by hand, it'll be filed away, and that's it. We'll never know in the future what the application was, or we can. I used to work at City Hall, and I'll tell you guys a little secret. A while back, we got a Freedom of Information request, and someone said, how many tall buildings have you planners at City Hall approved over 20 stories? We looked at each other, we didn't know. We did not have the information. We hadn't been collecting the data. We had to get one of our interns to spend 2 weeks going through things like this to actually collect that data. there's better things, ways of doing things. We're actually now looking at, is there a way that you can actually automate aspects of the planning application process? Maybe not decide, we don't want computers deciding our planning applications, but maybe computers can help planners make a better decision, quickly flag some of the big issues, or maybe even decide some of the simpler applications. Then the fourth area, and last, this is how, at the minute, you find out if a 50-story building is going to be built at the end of your street. Now, the first few slides I told about artificial intelligence, about big data, about the technology. We can do better than this. I don't even have to kind of hint at what we can do, but it's obvious that we can. So it's no wonder that the public, people think, oh, planners are just, planning is done to us, developers are evil. People feel completely alienated and uncertain. It doesn't need to be this way. If we actually start engaging people in early on in kind of the policies and the outcomes that people want, we've got the tools to do this much better than we had before. Real-time visualizations. We now have things like augmented reality where we can see and experience a building even before it's built. We can engage citizens in a much better way. So one thing that we did when we started this project was we actually thought, okay, what is the planning system of the future? And we often do this and we think, okay, let's look ahead. Now when we make predictions, it's always, you should never believe anyone that says, oh, this is what's going to be the future. But I'm telling you, this is what might be the future for planning. It's not going to be like this. But maybe there is a future where actually the planning system is something much more data-rich, where all the data that's coming from the city can be collected and assessed and analyzed, where planners can tweak policies individually based on what's actually happening in the city, where developers can easily understand and test their planning applications, and citizens can actually can start kind of saying, actually, no, we're not happy with the level of health, air quality, the air qualities we have now. These are outcomes. Can citizens start being involved in this? Now, this might sound far-fetched, and it probably is, but this stuff is starting to happen already. You're going to hear from Fran in a little bit on a small step towards this. Recently, we launched an open call about a month ago, where we got 87 different SMEs who have got ideas of how to move planning into the future, into the 21st century. And I think there's a lot to do. Thank you.